Hello everyone and welcome to my workshop. I'm Deziel and today I'm showing you how to do the pattern for a tulip sleeve. That is a pretty cute style that comes back to fashion. So it might be an interesting style for you to learn. Before to start the pattern of the tulip sleeve, I want you to look at what is different about this sleeve. First of all, the tulip sleeve could be done in two pieces like this one. So I have a seam at the underarm, or it could also be done in all in one piece when you eliminate the seam allowance at the underarm. The characteristic of this sleeve is that you have an overlap, or the front over the back or the back over the front. Both looks very cute. So if you look at the sleeve from the shoulder line of the bodice, you see that the sleeve goes over towards the back in that case. And if I look under, always from the shoulder line, you see that the under part also goes in the opposite direction. Here it goes towards the front. Now I show you another sample that I did using exactly the same pattern. Here, instead of finishing my hem with a clean finish with the seam allowance between the layers, I changed the finishing to give a different look. I just did the lettuce edge or the marrow edge finishing, but it is done with exactly the same pattern. Now for today's pattern of the tulip sleeve, I'm using again my size 4 kids block, but you must know that it is the same technique even if you have an adult size pattern. In my last video, I show you how I did the short sleeve from my basic block, so my seam allowance are already included. And for today's sleeve style, I just retrace my short sleeve block. The first thing we're going to do is determine how much we want the sleeve to overlap at the sleeve head. Remember that the measurement that you're going to put from the grain line is going to be double because you're going to have exactly the same measurement on the other side of the grain line. And that's the area where you're going to have at least double fabric. The measurement I'll use today is approximately, I'll do it by eyes because it's a matter of style, I'll do about 4 centimeters. The second thing we will do is fix the bottom of the sleeve because you know you have a little angle at the underarm seam. So to make our short sleeve a nice and continuous line even at the underarm, we're going to put the square right on this underarm seam and trace a 90-degree for a little while. It could be 2 or 3 centimeters, even 4 centimeters, it's up to you, but you must trace a square line. Now the next thing we're going to do is to trace a line from that point that we found at the sleeve head until the 90-degree that we did at the bottom. This line is a style line, so the shape that you like. The only thing I could say is that where you're going to touch the grain line with this point is going to tell you where you're going to start to see the skin or the arm. The top part is going to be double, and below that point is the part where you're going to start showing the skin. Now when you're happy with your style line, you're going to take your pattern or plan and fold it right on the grain line or the center of the sleeve. Then you're going to take your tracing wheel and on one side you're going to trace the bottom of the sleeve here or your style line. You're going to turn it around and trace the other part of your style line. Once you finish tracing, you're going to open your pattern, and here I'm going to use a different color marker so you could see. I did trace my style line on the back side. I'm now going to retrace what I did with the tracing wheel to get the front side. Now just like I showed you before on my sample and what I explained before, you could see here that the front goes up to here and the top part, the triangle that you see, you have the back that goes up to there, all that area is going to be double, and from the intersection of on the grain line, all that part is going to show the arm. Now the next thing we're going to do on that plan pattern is to trace the facing for the finishing, because you have a curved line, so you cannot just fold it. You need a facing for the hem or the finishing of the bottom. For this example, since it's a kid's pattern, I'm going to do a narrower facing of about 3 centimeters, and I'm going to trace it for the front 3 centimeters parallel to my style line, and also a 3 centimeter parallel to the back area, parallel also to the style line. Now I'm just going to clarify that we now have 4 pieces. We have the back sleeve piece that goes from the armhole to the style line, and the back facing from the 3 cm to the style line. Same thing in the front, from the armhole to the style line, and from the 3 cm to the style line. Those 4 pieces, the sleeve piece, they're a little different, but we already have different indication with the armhole notch. While the facing, they're very similar, but they're also a little bit different, especially at this area, at the sleeve head, where the sleeve head is a little different shape. So we should put notches for assembling the facing to the sleeve piece on both back and front, and we should do them different. So I'm going to place 1 single notch on the front and a double notch at a different area, a double notch on the back one. Now we're ready to retrace the 4 pattern piece. I suggest you keep your plan as it is for reference, and that you put, just like I will do, 2 layers of paper that will cover the front area, then 2 layers of paper under the back area. Now you see that I did put my 4 layers, 2 for front, 2 for back. I'm now going to retrace my style line for the front, style line for the back. Don't forget to indicate your notches for assembling. And you're also going to trace the facing line of the front and the facing line of the back. Now that we finished tracing, we're simply going to take the paper and cut all around. Since we already have the seam allowance, we're also going to do the notches that are already there, so back, front armhole, and the shoulder notch. Now when you finish cutting and notching, we're ready to separate the pieces, but I want you to keep the 2 front pieces together and the 2 back pieces together. So just move your pin from the top to the under piece. So I have my 2 pins for the front side, and I will do the same thing for my back side. Like you will notice, you must put your pin more towards the underarm so you could easily separate your back and your front piece. And looking at your plan, you're going to retrace the style line on the paper so we could add the seam allowance. Now, if you remember, we also indicate or trace the grain line, and it's going to be the same grain line for all the pieces, but we could already start by tracing on the top layer the grain line. Then the next thing is going to be to add the seam allowance on both back and front, because the style line we did is the only line that doesn't have the seam allowance. Then we're going to cut on the seam line for both back and front, and we're going to do the notch, double in the back and single in the front. We have right now two of the same piece. One of them have to become the facing, so we're going to separate the piece, trace the grain line on the bottom one, so it will be your sleeve piece, and we're going to cut on the facing line that should be finished with overlock most probably. So we're going to cut on that line, and that's going to become the facing piece. And we do that for both back and front. That's it, the pattern for the tulip sleeve is finished, and each of these 4 pieces should be cut 2 times. Now maybe you remember at the beginning I said that the sleeve could also be done in 1 piece, and the way to make the tulip sleeve in 1 piece is simply by putting back your pieces together. You need to find or trace your seam line on both pieces. And look, I'm going to fold it so it'll be easier for you to see. Folding on the seam line and putting the seam line right over the seam line of the other pattern. And you would glue them together so your sleeve becomes one single piece. Now let's take a look at the little sleeve in 1 piece. When you overlap or the front on the back or the back on the front, putting the shoulder notch one over the other, here you have your style for the little tulip sleeve. Most probably, if you do eliminate your underarm seam for the sleeve part, you wanted to do the same thing for the facing part, and you will do it the same way. First, find your seam line, fold on one of them, then you bring it right over to the other piece and you glue them in position. Now if you do decide to glue your piece together, it's really nice and clean finish. You're going to have the grain line problem. In that case, I suggest you do your grain line right at the underarm seam. And of course, to make your assemble with the armhole easier, I would add a notch exactly at the underarm seam on the armhole side. And of course you will do the same thing for your facing, so no more of these grain lines. You would do it right at the underarm seam, but what stays is that you still have to cut 2 of each pattern piece. So you have your left sleeve and your right sleeve. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure you watch my next video. I'm showing you how to do a leg of mutton sleeve.